All right, here's a question to kick us off. If you had to pick, would you rather be like the wisest person ever or the humblest? It makes you think, doesn't it? Are you picturing someone like Solomon, you know, legendary wisdom,
Mm.
or maybe someone more like Moses, known for, well, deep humility? Today on the deep dive, we are really getting into something profound.
Yeah.
Humility, specifically humility in leadership. We've got some really powerful insights here from a source called Humility. It looks at how pride, sneaky thing that it is, often hides behind this mask of overconfidence, and why that's just so dangerous, especially if you're leading people.
Yeah, absolutely. And our goal today really is to unpack what the source suggests is a kind of universal antidote for that hubris, that excessive pride. We want to explore the really subtle ways pride can, undermine even the best leaders. And ultimately, we want to reveal the power of what this material calls ambitious leadership. We'll use a timeless role model as our guide here. And look, this isn't just about being like nice or quiet. It's about real, effective, lasting influence, the kind that actually empowers others.
Okay, let's unpack this, because honestly, this gets really interesting fast. So let's start with the core problem our source points to: overconfidence. Now, it's easy to think, oh, that person's just arrogant, right? Annoying, maybe? But the source argues it's actually dangerous.
Yeah.
Really dangerous, because it just clanks up that temptation we all have to fall completely in love with our own ideas. And that leads to these super rigid perspectives. It creates this internal echo chamber,
Mm-hmm.
where this little voice is just whispering, hey, you're really smart, you're great at this, you're pretty much always right. You know that voice.
Oh, definitely. And what's fascinating is seeing this tension even way back in ancient texts, like you mentioned Solomon and wisdom, everyone connects those two. But Moses, we don't always immediately think humility, even though the book of Numbers explicitly says, let me find it, Numbers 12.3. Now, Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone on the face of the earth. And scholars often figure, well, that little note in parentheses, probably added by an editor later, because, how could Moses himself write that without it sounding, well, prideful? It shows how tricky defining and recognizing humility has always been.
Exactly. And that nails why it's so hard to see in ourselves. I mean, it's usually easier to say, yeah, okay, I'm not very patient, than it is to admit, you know what, I might lack humility. Pride just seems to want to burrow down, hide in those dark corners of the heart, right? Makes genuine self-awareness a real challenge. And to really show how deep this hiding goes, the source shares this incredibly raw, personal story from the author. They were a leader on a short-term mission trip, got arrested unexpectedly. So they're in this holding cell, and a guard picks them out, motions for them to follow. No shared language, no idea what's happening. The guard leads them to this bathroom, hands them a broom, a rag, a garbage bag, and basically gestures, clean this. And this wasn't just like a slightly messy bathroom. We're talking standing water on the floor, clogged drains, hair stuck everywhere, squat toilets. Just grim. So the author starts cleaning, the guard leaves. And that's when the internal battle kicks off. It wasn't just, ugh, this is disgusting. It was, the author says, a profound sense of humiliation. And they realized the pushback, the revulsion they felt. It wasn't really about the germs, it was pride. Plain and simple.
Right. And that moment of realizing this is pride becomes the turning point. There's this sense, this internal conviction that comes through saying something like, you came here wanting to tell people about Jesus. What if you just threw yourself into this, made this the cleanest bathroom it's ever been? And that completely flipped the script. It turned this degrading task into, well, an act of service, an act of worship almost.
Yeah. And when the guard came back later, the author, like, genuinely smiled and tried to convey, through gestures how glad they were for the chance to clean. The guard eventually signaled, okay, you're done, but the author actually motions back like, no, I need more time, this sinks. Apparently the guard just stared, like total disbelief, couldn't comprehend it.
And the author is clear this one experience didn't magically cure their tendency towards pride. I mean, who gets cured of that instantly? But it was this incredibly stark moment that exposed just how easily pride hides from our conscious awareness. And that's huge, especially for leaders, because self-awareness is tough enough without pride actively trying to camouflage itself. Which brings us to this really interesting point from Malcolm Gladwell. It's quite counterintuitive. He argues that for leaders, particularly as you move up in an organization, overconfidence becomes a bigger problem than actual incompetence.
Wait, really? Bigger than incompetence? That sounds backwards. Wouldn't being bad at your job be worse?
Well, Gladwell's logic is this. Most organizations have ways of filtering out chronic incompetence, especially at lower levels. If you consistently mess up, you probably won't get promoted much, right? And here's the kicker. The very things that filter out incompetence, like success, recognition, promotion, those same forces can actually feed overconfidence. The system rewards success, which can inflate the ego if you're not careful.
Ah, okay. So the phrase the source uses is, incompetence is frustrating. Overconfidence is scary. That makes more sense now. Incompetence might make things difficult, sure,
Right.
but overconfidence is scary because it leads to that rigidity, that absolute certainty of being right, the inability to hear other views or admit mistakes. It basically builds a wall,
Exactly. It shuts down learning, shuts down adaptation.
which leads us to this really compelling, maybe slightly uncomfortable idea in the material,
Yeah.
the concept of accidental Phariseeism. Now, usually when we hear Pharisee, it's negative, right? Judgmental, hypocritical.
Modern lens, yeah.
But the source points out, back in Jesus' time, being called a Pharisee, that was often like a badge of honor. These were the really dedicated people. They were zealous, committed, knew their scriptures inside out, followed the rules meticulously, even added extra ones for good measure. They were the good guys in many ways.
And therein lies the danger. Their very piety, their dedication, it actually morphed into this grave overconfidence. They were so utterly convinced they had God all figured out, so sure of their interpretation, that when Jesus showed up, he just didn't fit their mold. He didn't match their plan. It's a chilling example of how you can be respected, you can love God, love Scripture, be doing all the right things, and still be profoundly, dangerously, overconfidently wrong.
And the scary part, the really unsettling part, is that this isn't typically a problem for the lazy leaders, the ones just coasting.
No, not at all.
It's precisely the trap for the dedicated, the disciplined, the passionate ones. The source says it starts with a blind spot, not necessarily a sin spot. Pride is just that clever, hiding behind the mask of confidence and dedication.
Dallas Willard, a theologian mentioned in the source, he warns about this. He says outward success, it brings accomplishment, responsibility, sure. But it can also subtly reorient vision away from God to what we are doing. So, the service to Christ can start to replace actual love for Christ deep down. It's a risk for anyone in a position of influence, really, when the what overshadows the why.
Yeah, that's a really subtle drift, isn't it? Where the ministry we do for God becomes a proxy for intimacy with God. You start focusing on the outward stuff, the results. And when those results look good, you get applause, people support you. And suddenly it gets easier to rationalize these little shortcuts of the heart, things you'd never have considered at the start. The confidence from success just slides into overconfidence, and bam, pride has found its perfect hiding spot. Which brings us to the crucial question for anyone listening. Okay, how would I even know if this drift is happening to me?
Well, the source suggests looking back at those religious leaders in Jesus' time gives us two really clear warning signs, two obsessions that can totally derail leaders: survival and status.
Okay, survival and status. Let's dig into survival first. How does that manifest?
The material explains that leaders can get so fixated on just keeping the thing going, the organization, the system, their own position, that they become completely incapable of recognizing what God was doing right before their eyes. They're so busy maintaining the status quo, protecting the structure, that they miss vital new directions, crucial changes, maybe even the very mission they started with.
Wow. And there's a paradox there, right? If your main goal becomes, we cannot fail, if failing to survive is not an option.
Exactly. Then you stop taking important risks. You avoid necessary changes because they feel threatening. And ironically, that makes the organization less likely to adapt and survive in the long run. It reminds me of that Henry Ford quote the source uses. If you need a new machine and don't buy it, you eventually end up paying for the machine but don't have it. You pay the price, stagnation.
And tied into this survival instinct is the trap of just being busy. Non-stop activity.
Oh yeah, the hamster wheel.
Leaders try to prove they're indispensable by just doing lots of stuff. Like, look how busy I am. I must be important. You know, equating frantic activity with actual value. We've all seen it. Sometimes, maybe we've even been that hamster on the wheel. Right?
We have, and Dallas Willard hits this so hard. He says, God never gives anyone too much to do. We do that to ourselves, or we allow others to do it to us. The author shares this really pointed internal conviction they felt once. You don't trust me, and that's why you are working so hard. You think you can accomplish more in 7 days than I can in 6. That's why you don't have a Sabbath rhythm. That idea of intentional rest, stepping back, it's framed as an act of trust. Overwork can actually stem from a lack of trust that things will be okay if you're not constantly driving them.
And let's face it, our Western leadership culture, it basically worships busyness. It's like the ultimate badge of honor. So leaders who actually prioritize rest, reflection, a sustainable pace. They're really swimming against strong currents.
Yeah.
It takes courage.
It really does. Okay, so the second obsession is status. The material points out that status has sort of become the primary non-monetary reward for leadership. For a lot of leaders in many fields, looking important is important, maybe even more important than being effective.
And the source lists these common status traps, things like using your position on the chart for influence rather than your character. Association, name-dropping famous people to seem important. Information hoarding, keeping data to yourself for power. Exaggeration, puffing up results to look good. And even education overly relying on degrees or fancy institutions for credibility.
These aren't just little quirks, are they? They actively erode trust.
Totally. And A.W. Tozer, that Christian thinker, he had some really sharp words about this. He observed how things like egotism, exhibitionism, self-promotion are sometimes weirdly tolerated, even admired in leaders, sometimes even cloaked in religious language.
Yeah, he called it promoting self under the guise of promoting Christ. But you see variations of this everywhere, right? When the leader's image becomes the focus, not the mission itself.
It's so true. And the hardest part is seeing it in ourselves. It's easy to point fingers. The author even says, everyone is against status-based leadership until they have status. Ouch. That hits home, doesn't it?
It does. It's that subtle allure of importance.
There is an alternative, a really powerful one. The source introduces this fantastic concept, humbition. It's a word coined, apparently, by researchers at Bell Labs, of all places.
Yeah.
And it describes this unique blend, this fusion of humility and ambition that they found in truly successful, impactful leaders.
Right. And Jane Harper, who trained leaders at IBM, she wrote this manifesto saying essentially that world-changing luminaries are humble people. They're intensely focused on the work, on the mission, not on themselves. They are ambitious, they strive for big things, but when success comes, they're humbled when it arrives. They recognize luck, timing, the contributions of others, all the factors beyond their own effort. They don't push others down, they lift them up.
And she uses that incredible metaphor. The biggest leader is the one washing the feet of others. It just instantly connects to figures like Jesus, right? Who didn't just talk about servant leadership. He physically demonstrated it, washing his followers' feet. An unforgettable picture of power redefined.
Absolutely. And the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, gives this amazing summary of Jesus's leadership approach. Our source breaks it down into 4 key postures of humility that we can actually try to emulate.
Okay, 4 postures. Let's take them one by one. Posture number 1.
No status belongs to me.
Right. Paul says Jesus, although in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or held onto tightly. He deliberately chose a posture opposite to those status-hungry leaders of his day.
And this circles right back to those status traps we just talked about: position, association, information, and so on. It's a call to really examine, okay, where might I be subtly relying on those things? It reinforces that warning about hidden pride undermining us, even when we think our motives are pure.
Okay, posture 2.
No service is beneath me.
Jesus made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. He taught, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. And then, crucially, he didn't just say it, he showed it. Basin, towel, dirty feet. Actions speaking louder than words.
You know, Elizabeth Elliot said something profound. The best way to find out whether you really have a servant's heart is to see what your reaction is when somebody treats you like one. That hits hard, doesn't it? And it connects perfectly back to that bathroom cleaning story. The initial reaction wasn't a servant's heart, it was wounded pride. The transformation came through embracing the service.
It reminds me too of that Booker T. Washington story. Being asked by a wealthy woman to chop wood, doing it graciously. Then her embarrassment when she found out who he was, and his response, "It's perfectly all right, madam. It's always a delight to do something for a friend." That humility didn't diminish him. It actually led to support for Tuskegee. It magnified his influence.
And the source argues this freedom to serve comes from deep security. It points to John 13, right before the foot washing, saying Jesus acted because he knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. Quote, when you're secure in who you are and your ultimate purpose, you have nothing to prove and are free to serve. Your identity isn't tied up in how others see you in that moment.
Powerful. Okay, posture number 3.
No sacrifices beyond me.
Paul writes that Jesus humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. The source even notes the exclamation point Paul uses there. This wasn't just death, it was the most humiliating form of execution. What a stark contrast to leaders who cling to perks, privileges, and comfort, rather than embracing necessary sacrifice for the mission or the people they lead.
Yeah, and to help us evaluate this in our own lives, the source offers a really practical set of questions about the perks of leadership. We should ask, 1, do I actually need this for my job? Is it functional? 2, is this fair compensation, or does it create unhealthy gaps? 3, does this perk create distance, real or perceived? Does it stop people giving me honest feedback? 4, does it feed my ego? Does it make me more vulnerable to pride? And 5, would this perk make it really hard for me to eventually step down? Am I getting too attached to the privileges?
Those are searching questions. Really gets you thinking. It brings back Jesus' words, "Not so with you," and that quote from C.T. Studd. "If Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice is too great for me to make for him."
Exactly. Which leads to the fourth posture, no success is because of me.
This is a big one. While God ultimately honored Jesus' sacrifice, leaders constantly face the temptation to think that any success achieved is purely down to them, their brilliance, their effort.
But Jesus himself modeled the opposite. He said things like, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees the Father doing. And by myself I can do nothing. I seek not to please myself, but him who sent me. It's this posture of dependence, of acknowledging that true accomplishment comes from alignment and collaboration, often with forces beyond ourselves, maybe even divine enablement. It's not a solo act.
So the source stresses that God rewards obedience, faithfulness, alignment, not just flashy results. If good things happen, the humble response is, okay, great, but it wasn't just me. Give glory to God, give praise to the team, acknowledge the circumstances.
Right. And if things don't go well, the humble response isn't blame shifting. It's, okay, maybe it was partly me. Let's figure out what went wrong, what I need to change. It's taking responsibility.
Beyond these four postures, the source highlights two simple phrases, calls them magic words that leaders, especially overconfident ones, find incredibly hard to say.
Yeah, just two simple phrases. I was wrong.
And I don't know.
Simple, but so powerful. The source says leaders who never say these things, they should make us nervous.
Because it links right back to that accidental Phariseeism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you're overconfident, you can't easily admit you were wrong. There's always a justification, a reason, someone else to blame.
Precisely. Imagine the trust built when a leader can genuinely say, you know what, my approach on that was wrong, we need to change course. Or, honestly, I don't have the answer to that right now, but let's find it together. That's not weakness, that's strength. That builds psychological safety.
And it's funny, the source notes, it's often easier to say, I don't have all the answers, than it is to admit, actually, some of the answers I do have, they might be wrong.
Ooh, that's subtle but true. It requires real humility to question your own firmly held beliefs.
Yeah. And A.W. Tozer comes back here with those piercing questions he asked about leadership in his day. Things like vying for position, craving praise, loving publicity, political maneuvering, ego, worshiping powerful people.
And his devastating conclusion, these are the very sins that crucified Jesus. It's a sobering reminder of where unchecked, status-seeking leadership can ultimately lead. It's not just ineffective, it can be destructive.
It really is. And the source includes this stark warning. It is possible to have the power of God flowing through you without the favor of God resting on you, at least for a season. Meaning you can be achieving things looking successful on the outside, but your inner state, your connection to your core values or your faith might be completely off track.
Exactly, which is why truly ambitious leaders understand that core principle. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Their focus is on impact, on contribution, on service, not on personal gain or using their position for themselves. They build something lasting beyond their own ego.
You know, thinking about Peter comes to mind. Famously brash, overconfident early on, then that crushing failure, the denial. But he was humbled, restored. And later when he writes, humble yourselves under God's mighty hand that he may lift you up in due time. Well, that advice carries weight, doesn't it? It's credible because he lived it. He learned it the hard way.
That's the beautiful closing image, really. Humility, lifted by grace in due time. It's not about putting yourself down constantly. It's about having an accurate view of yourself that allows grace, or maybe just reality, to elevate you appropriately, sustainably.
Wow. Okay, we have definitely covered a lot of ground today. It's been quite a journey. We've seen how easily overconfidence can mask pride, potentially leading even really dedicated leaders down that path of accidental Phariseeism. But we've also explored this incredibly hopeful counter-narrative of ambition, that powerful mix of humility and ambition grounded in these profound examples of service and sacrifice.
Yeah, and hopefully as you've been listening, you've been thinking about how this holds up a mirror to your own life, your own leadership, whatever form that takes. Where might pride be hiding out in your blind spots? Are there perks or comforts you're maybe clinging to a bit too tightly? Is busyness maybe covering up a deeper lack of trust?
And here's where it gets really interesting to think about applying this.
Mm.
What's one seemingly essential perk, or maybe a status symbol, or even just a habit of busyness in your life? What's one thing you might need to consciously reevaluate or maybe even let go of to more fully embrace that posture of a servant? What might you need to release to genuinely empower others, cultivate deeper trust, and make space for grace, or maybe just sustainable success to lift you up instead of relying solely on your own striving?